Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our webinar. So this is the webinar on how California's local governments are implementing the American Rescue Plan Fiscal Recovery Fund. So the webinar is brought to you by the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network and the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition. The webinar will be 90 minutes long. So we'll run until 12 p.m. So next slide, please. Before we start, wanted to just give folks a couple of reminders. First of all, please get comfortable. You're welcome to go grab some water or snacks and take care of yourself. Second, please be mindful in the shared virtual space. So as you could tell, we're on like a meeting instead of a webinar format. So make sure you're muting your audio when you're not speaking. Thirdly, let tech work for you. So you're welcome to use the chat box to introduce yourself. If you have questions, comments, and additional resources you want to share with the rest of the participants or with the speakers, feel free to toss them in the chat. And also feel free to either stay on or off the camera, however you feel like, socially, energy-wise. And lastly, if you don't have note-taking, do not worry. We are sharing the slides and a recording of the session after the webinar. So you will have those resources emailed to you after the webinar. Next slide, please. So first of all, I want to introduce the presenters for the webinar. So my name is Wei-Yu Zhang. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate policy director at the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network, or CPEHN. And I have my colleague, Andrea Mackey, who's a policy manager at CPEHN joining me. And I also have Alexis from the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition joining us. So very excited. This is the panel of presenters for you today. Next slide. So for today's goals, we have some outcomes that we're hoping to achieve from this webinar. So as a participant, we hope that you will be able to, first of all, gain a basic understanding of the American Rescue Plan Act State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund Program, as well as its potential impact on California's disadvantaged populations. Second, we want to share, and we hope you'll learn about some of the successes, gaps, and challenges with the local governments that we analyzed in terms of how they've been performing in using this fund source. And then we also want to help you learn how you can get involved with your county or city's ARPA process. And finally, we hope you get excited about taking some action steps to hold your local government accountable in this budgetary process. Next slide. In terms of agenda, so we'll cover a lot of things today in our 90 minutes together. So we want to spend some time in the beginning talking about the background and this research project that CPEHN did. So we want to, share with you what is ARPA. You'll periodically hear us talk about ARPA. We want to share, what is at stake, why do we care about this funding, and then we want to share with you some of the research and analysis findings from CPEHN'S project, auditing and grading 11 of California's counties, and some of the key findings. And then we are going to bring on Alexis to talk about a successful local ARPA campaign that he and his colleagues did in Calexico City, Imperial County, California. And it's a really inspiring story. I'm very excited for all of you guys to hear that. And then we'll spend some time towards the end covering additional tools and resources and talk about how can you get involved in your local advocacy processes. And finally, we have some time towards the end of the webinar to answer questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're diving right in. We want to talk about, first of all, what is ARPA and why do we care and what is at stake? Next slide. So some quick facts. ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, it was a federal legislation that was signed into law in 2021 by President Joe Biden, and it is the sixth COVID-19 recovery measure that the US Congress has passed since the beginning of the pandemic, which is March 2020. And so the entire federal legislation is at 1.9 trillion. So it's a huge package meant for COVID relief. But the specific program that we're looking at that sent money to local governments is called the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. It's a mouthful, so sometimes we call it Recovery Fund or Fiscal Recovery Fund, but you will hear ARPA and the Fiscal Recovery Fund repetitively in this webinar, so make sure you familiarize yourself with these terms. And so this specific program is a total of 350 billion. So out of that 1.9 trillion package, there is this 350 billion pocket of money that is has gone to state, local, and tribal governments, and these are unprecedented amount of funding that is actually flexible, spending categories. And so just make sure you grasp these quick facts and the sort of the basic the basic concepts of this webinar. And on the right hand side of this slide, you'll see sort of like a money flow of this program. And so, in terms of the federal COVID-19 funding, which applies to the ARPA legislation, the 350 billion from this recovery fund program is going directly from the federal government to local government. So it is not actually going through the state. The state is not being a pass-through in this scenario. And so local governments, including cities and counties, are getting the money directly from the US Treasury. So that tells you sort of the compliance mechanism which we'll talk about later. Next slide. And so how much money are we talking about here, right? And so the entire program is 350 billion that is going to state, local, and tribal governments. But in the landscape of California, and I put up this table here for you to just get a sense of how much money we're talking about. California's counties and cities have received a total of 16 billion. So out of that 350, there's 16 billion that is set aside to go to California's cities and counties. In addition to that, because this money is directly sent from the federal, the California state government also received its own allocation, which is 27 billion. And so those two pots of money are separate. And so in terms of the timeline of when governments get to spend the money, they actually get to spend the money starting from March 2021 throughout the entire, the next couple of years until December 2026. And so that is actually a really long timeline that we're talking about in terms of implementing this program. And then I also put up a comparison data on the right-hand side, comparing ARPA to the CARES Act. So the CARES Act was also one of the major COVID relief measures that was passed during the pandemic. But if you were to compare the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is a very similar local relief fund source under the CARES Act, you could see that local governments in terms of counties and cities only received a 5.8 billion from the CARES Act, and they had a much shorter time period to spend that 5.8 billion. They only had, I think, a little less than 2 years, right, from March 2020 to the end of 2021. So the point here is that ARPA is spending unprecedented amount of relief funds to local governments with a much longer spending period. Next slide. So in terms of looking at more, so zooming in to look at the county level allocations. And so there are a total of 16 counties in California that have each received over 100 million from the state and local fiscal recovery program. And so there's a lot of numbers on this slide, but I do want to show you who are the 16 counties. And this includes San Francisco City and County, which is a joint government. But as you could tell, the most allocation went to Los Angeles County, given its population size. It's actually at 1.9 billion, and this is a lot of money. And the bottom one is San Francisco County, who received a little over 100 million. And then on the right-hand side is a map of California, and then the colors is the 2020 election results. So out of the 16 counties, CPEHN analyzed 11 of the 16 counties. So all of the 11 counties that we analyzed have received over 100 million each. Next slide, please. And so why do we care about ARPA? I'm quoting some important people here on this slide. There's this quote from the president and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation saying that the American Rescue Plan Act is a down payment on an equitable America. And there's also a statement from the American Public Health Association saying that essentially this legislation provides opportunities for, really responding to the challenges of an under-resourced public health system, long-standing disparity and systemic racism that have only exacerbated during the pandemic. And so I'm quoting these because ARPA as a piece of federal legislation was passed at a time essentially at the height of the pandemic, right? March 2021. And then it was also passed at a time after, a nationwide racial justice uprising, after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many other Black lives that were lost to police violence. And so this piece of legislation really came in to send money to local governments to respond to the challenges that we're faced with on the ground and really addressing the disparities. And so our vision for ARPA is that the entire legislation is a public health and racial equity bill. And that is really the reason why we care about ARPA, amongst the many other reasons. Next slide. So what is this money for, right? I talked about how it is the fiscal recovery fund program. It's meant for COVID recovery, but there's very specific guidance that the Department of the Treasury has published to really guide local governments in using this fund. There were 2 rules that were made, separately throughout the process. There was an interim final rule that was published in the summer of 2021, right after local governments received their first payment. And then there was a final rule after there was like a comment period open. But right now, what's in effect is the final rule that has been published by the federal government. And in addition to the final rule, there is a lot of guidance around how local governments are supposed to comply and report to the federal government in how they're using the money. And so, I'm bringing that up because a lot of our analysis are essentially relying on, the Treasury's guidance that's been published. I want to call out specific language in these rules. First of all, from both the final and the interim final rules, this money, the $350 billion, is supposed to provide assistance to individuals and communities in the greatest need, particularly communities that have been historically disadvantaged or underserved and have experienced disproportionate impacts of the COVID-19 crisis. So it really calls out how this money is supposed to serve, disadvantaged and oppressed communities. Second, in the interim final rule, there was a lot of language urging the government to really engage their communities in the decision-making processes of the implementation and really making sure that there is public input, transparency, and accountability. And so the interim final rule was in effect for the first year of this program. And so we also relied a lot on the guidance in the interim final rule when it comes to holding the local governments accountable in the process. Next slide. And more on what is the money for. So the Treasury in its final rule listed out 4 different categories on how local governments can spend the money. First of all, responding to the public health and negative economic impacts. Second, providing premium pay to essential workers. Third, providing government services to the extent of revenue loss due to the pandemic. And lastly, making necessary investment in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So I'm calling these categories not necessarily like the legal categories, but they're more like encouraged uses, right? Like for local governments to think about how do you want to plan out the allocation that you received to really meet the various needs on the ground during the pandemic. And the reason that this money comes with a lot of flexibility and in fact discretion to the local government is because the only non-eligible or illegal use is for local governments to make deposits into pension funds. So I want to pause there and say that again. The only uneligible use is pension fund deposits. And so everything else under the sun is pretty much a fair game, according to the Treasury. And again, if you look at the 4 categories, those are more of like, sort of like a encourage or recommended framework for local governments to think about fund use. Next slide. And the flexibility of this fiscal recovery fund program presents huge opportunities, right? And tying it back to the vision we have for ARPA, which is a public cost racial equity bill, really local governments have a lot of leverage in terms of, using this money to, bolster ongoing pandemic response and really meeting the urgent health, social, and economic needs of their underserved communities. Second, they can use this funding to do a little bit of like, really improving their infrastructure, right? As we know, public health has been really under-resourced and underfunded. And so really, I think local governments have a opportunity to use some of the money to strengthen both their governmental and non-governmental infrastructure in public health and social services, through ways like workforce improvement, data collection, giving money to community-based organizations, etc. And thirdly, there's really that long-term equity planning that government can use this money to springboard, right? Even if it's a one-time funding, it's meant to be spent over the course of like 5 years. And so really governments can use this to springboard and pilot innovative strategies to really address systemic racism, to really rethink public safety, and funding community-based alternative solutions. And these are really well within the realm of, possibility for them to fund. And lastly, I think one of the opportunity that the ARPA money presents is for local governments to rethink local budget making. Because of the language that the Treasury has laid out in terms of, transparency, public accountability, engaging constituencies, local governments can, think about this pot of money as an opportunity where they get to really listen to their communities and co-create, budgetary and strategic priorities with the folks that are most impacted from the pandemic and historically. So that's really more of like a process-wide and long-term opportunity that, we see through this program. Next slide. So with the flexibility, there's also enormous risk. And there's a lot at stake, right? And on this slide, I'm quoting really a statement coming from one of our other projects studying local budget. It talks about local health disparities stem from the legacies of white supremacy and racial capitalism that is entrenched in governmental policies and resource allocation. I feel like that is part of the frustration and the resistance with local advocacy is that so much of the system is really resisting to change, right? And there's not a lot of built-in, advocacy structure or accountability structure to hold, for example, board of supervisors accountable or city councils accountable. And also, in addition to that, one of the main research interests here at CPEHN is that we have, through work with our community partners, realized that there's a huge amount of evidence showing that the previous round of COVID relief dollars have been funneled to the criminal legal system on the local levels, including, the CARES Act dollars I was mentioning earlier, FEMA dollars. And so there's many, many ways that local governments are very creative in funneling money to the criminal legal system. For example, giving personnel premium pay or hero pay, giving overtime and purchasing new equipment and vehicles, even creating specialized COVID police units to respond to COVID, which we know are not going to work for our Black and brown communities. And so we are very concerned about, this time around, whether or not ARPA money is going to also be funneled to the criminal legal system, and really being put to the wrong uses, right? And so and there's some like news article, on this slide where we have already had, heard the stories of certain counties and cities in California, giving their COVID relief funding, federal relief funding to police. Next slide. And so I think finally, I want to go back to sort of the timeline piece of this program and remind people that, you know, this is a pot of money where we want local governments to balance a sense of urgency, right? Because there's so much need on the ground with our communities that are really being, you know, impacted by COVID, but also balancing that sense of urgency with deliberation. And so reviewing the timeline, ARPA was signed into law in, you know, earlier in 2021, March 2021, and then local governments are receiving their money in 2 payments, or what the Treasury called 2 tranches. The first payment was already deposited in May 2021, so shortly after the federal legislation was signed into law. And second, the second payment was just deposited to the local government's banks this May. So they received the payments in 2 separate deposits. But at this point, which is like now we're approaching July 2022, local governments have already received the entire allocation. So the money is at their bank account. They have until the end of December, so like December 2024 to obligate the funds, meaning they have to give the funding a purpose, right? Set up programs, set up the amounts for the programs. And so that's called obligating the funds. And they have actually until the end of December 2026 to spend the funds. So spending the funds is slightly different from obligating the funds, because essentially to me, that means the money has to be like out of the bank account of the local governments. And so, you know, they have to speak for a purpose by 2024 and then actually get the money out of the door by 2026. And if they don't, they have to return the money to the Treasury. But they have a long time, right? Multi-years to really make a decision around how they want to implement this historic, unprecedented, flexible funding. And so, next slide. Okay, so that was everything in terms of background, right? What is ARPA? You know, why do we care? What is at stake? What are the opportunities that we just covered? So I'm going to transition and go into this particular research project that CPEHN did, really looking into detail of how California's counties have been implementing. And so I see that there's some messages in the chat, but I encourage you to keep putting your questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll address your questions towards the end after the presentation. And so next slide. So essentially what CPEHN did was that we produced scorecards or report cards for counties. Our research goals were really to investigate and reveal how counties are performing in terms of equitably implementing these recovery funds, and also to lift up, you know, best practices or best efforts, as well as the gaps and limitations across these counties. So we picked 11 of the counties outside of the 16 counties that received over 100 million, you know, in allocation from the previous slide, if you remember. And so we really wanted to do some investigation. And again, you know, for us to produce these scorecards, our primary goal is really to support the local advocacy that our grassroots partners are doing, right? We want to make sure that you have some sort of analysis to refer to in your local advocacy, holding your local governments accountable, getting the demands met. And so that's our primary goal, but we do have a secondary goal, which is to provide, you know, the accountability and the education for our county officials. And we wanted to really encourage them to be curious and to grow, you know, through the findings that we found across 11 counties, because I think rarely do counties get to like be compared to a different county, because every county is so different. So we're trying to sort of produce some sort of comparable analysis for counties so that they can look at each other's scorecards and, you know, really compare their performances. Next slide, please. And I apologize if you hear dog bark in the back. Process or methodology. And so in order to really make sure we can produce some sort of a comparable analysis for counties, we designed a equity metric. And so we call this like a CPEHN racial equity metric for ARPA, and it consists of 51 questions on a 100-point system. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the metric in a bit, but keep in mind that it's the same metric that we're applying to all of the counties that we're analyzing. And so then, a team of us dug in and try to find all the information, the data that we can find to, use this metric to analyze. So the data included all the public reports that the local governments are supposed to submit to the Treasury. Remember, the Treasury is the oversight entity. And then looking at the meeting minutes from like county board of supervisors meetings, any public meetings they had with communities, any websites that the counties have set up or posted on their existing websites related to the ARPA programs. And then so we gather up that data and then we scored each county using this equity metric. The third step is the reviewing step. And so once we have our primary analysis, we held an interview with a local community-based organization for each of the county that we analyze, because again, as a statewide policy organization, we do not live in these counties. We don't know what it's like on the ground. We don't know, based on just the information we read online, how well the counties have been doing community engagement, for example. So we make sure to at least talk to one local organization to just do a gut check to see what their experiences have been. And then finally, we also gave the counties a time period to respond. So we send our finalized draft to the counties and we ask them, hey, do you, agree with our analysis? Are there additional data and information you want to provide with us? And we did make adjustments based on some of the counties' responses. And so finally, now we have the finalized points and we have the finalized written analysis. We graded the counties on a standard distribution curve. And so that's where I'm about to show you sort of the grades. But that's where the counties got the grades. The grades are on a comparable basis. And then there's also some additional analysis that we're producing across the counties to really identifying like key trends and best practices, the gaps and limitations, which we'll publish later this year. Next slide. And so, yes, a couple of more things just to know on the methodology piece, because we actually got a lot of questions from the counties on like, why are you just looking at ARPA? Like, what about our other program in terms of COVID response? And again, right, going back to the primary purpose and goal of this research project, we want to be able to offer the comparison, because without that comparison, we can encourage counties to grow and learn, right? So we are examining this particular program implementation, quote unquote, in a vacuum. And we see this as a reflection of the county's ongoing COVID-19 recovery efforts. It is not definitely everything, but it does tell a significant story of how the counties are responding to COVID, recovering from, the inequities, and really it's sort of like a key reflection point. Second, we wanted to turn some of the qualitative data into quantifiable points and comparable grades, right? And so we had to assign weighting to these questions. I mean, we designed the questions, but we also have to assign weightings. And the weighting really reflects, I would like to say, CPEHN'S values and how we think about racial equity, how we think about community engagement, right? There's a lot of reference documents we use, but essentially we put that all together and we wanted to say, this is how CPEHN, thinks of counties' performances. Thirdly, the investigation period. So as you can tell, this is an ongoing implementation project on the local government side, right? But we're just looking at from the beginning of when they can start allocating the fund, which is March 2021, which is retroactive, through the end of January or February 2022. And the reason for that is really largely because that was the latest compliance reports that the Treasury has published. And so we're essentially looking at the year one performance of local governments. And so there are efforts that happened post February 2022, which we did not factor into our analysis for this round. And because this is a multi-year implementation project, there is a large chance that we will come back and revisit the data and do another round of evaluation for counties and look at whether or not their grades improved, right? It's kind of like a multi-year, I don't know, school curriculum or project that people can really look at, like, have you improved in how you've been graded? And lastly, you know, our assessment is as good as how well the county has documented and shared information publicly. Some counties will say, I did this, or, you know, I don't agree with your grades. And then we'll ask them, do you have the evidence? Like, give us the receipts, right? So if you don't have that, like, we can't really give you points. And that's also to encourage local governments to really share the information of what they've been working on, which Ventura County did, and really, you know, document their efforts and making it transparent for everyone to see, right? Not just CPEHN. And so the table below kind of shows you again the equity metric that we assess. So we assess the 4 different areas: uses of funds, promoting racial equity, community engagement, and then transparency, accessibility, and accountability. And it's a total of 51 questions and 100 points. Next slide. So I want to quickly show you an example of a scorecard. I'm using Fresno County as an example. So all of the scorecards for the 11 counties are somewhere between 2 and 4 pages long. And so as you can tell, the county will get an overall grade. So in this case, Fresno County got grade C. They'll get a separate grade for all of the 4 areas that we looked at in terms of use of funds, promoting racial equity, community engagement, transparency, accessibility, and accountability. And then not just in addition to the grades, right, the letter grades, you will be able to read about the written analysis produced by CPEHN on what are the best efforts the counties have put out in terms of these areas and what are the gaps and limitations that they put out. And then you can also access the relevant links. So essentially the data that we collected that went into our analysis. Next slide. And so here is the overall findings across the 11 counties. And so, you know, as you could tell, we have Los Angeles County being a front runner. So LA has got a grade A for overall performance, also multiple A's for the rest of the areas. Not all though, they did get a B for transparency, accessibility, and accountability. We have San Diego and Orange County kind of running behind that, getting grade B's. And then, you know, the rest of the counties are all getting the C grades for overall. But if you look into the specific areas, it's not necessarily that, for example, San Diego County, right? They got B for overall, but they did get A grade for uses of funds. Same for Orange County. Orange County scored an A for transparency, accessibility, and accountability. And then Ventura County scored an A for community engagement. So there is like specific areas that counties did well in that, you know, that is like worth really highlighting. And so I do want to say that San Francisco City and County, as a city-county joint government, which we, you know, included in our county analysis, did not receive an overall grade and did not receive a grade for the uses of fund categories because San Francisco City and County did not provide any breakdown of how they've been spending their ARPA funds. So we'll talk a little more towards later when we talk about the key trends. Next slide. Okay. So the next couple of slides are some of the key findings from our cross-county analysis. And so there's a lot of words and a lot of information on these slides. So I'm going to go over these, but, you know, you're also welcome to read about these, you know, later when you get a copy of the slides. And we are publishing additional, you know, briefs and publications on some of these findings. But I do want to call out some of the key ones that we find interesting, right? First of all, overall, in terms of use of funds, how quickly and efficiently counties are setting up projects and spending money really vary largely. You know, even if counties have received their entire allocation as of this time point, there is still a lot that's left to be negotiated, especially in the Central Valley counties, as we noticed. There's some popular investments in terms of, you know, housing and homelessness, infrastructure improvement, COVID vaccinations, and some counties are giving funding to community-based organizations. In terms of gaps and limitations, and so, you know, one of our main research interests is really looking at whether or not funding has been funneled to the criminal legal systems. And unfortunately, it is the case with ARPA. This time around, counties are using a little more, I would like to say, like subtle ways of funneling the money into criminal legal systems. So they're giving like the personnel at like sheriff, probation, and jail, like what's called premium pay or hero pay. They're giving money to like payroll and overtime support, sometimes like data system improvements. So San Diego, Orange, Sacramento, Fresno, Kern, Ventura, San Joaquin, San Francisco, they're the ones that out of our research have all given some money to you know, these departments through some way, shape, or form. In terms of best practices, you know, I think I want to raise Los Angeles County as one of the examples for best efforts, but if you read about scorecards, really there is best efforts coming from almost every jurisdiction. And so want to call out Los Angeles County having one of the best, I would say, spending plan out of every other local government, including 47 million going towards its Care First Jail Last initiative, really focusing on, you know, providing care and support and moving into decarceration, and really providing services for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated folks. And so wanted to really elevate that as that is related to our research interest. Next slide. In terms of promoting racial equity, you know, in terms of best efforts, most counties did some sort of an acknowledgement. They said that COVID disparities exist by race. And so some counties in our you know, analysis did really well in terms of leveraging the existing racial equity infrastructure to implement the ARPA funds. And so there are some examples from LA, San Bernardino, and Ventura. And a few other counties are using quantitative data to identify health disparities and really guide their equity strategies. Los Angeles County created an ARPA equity dashboard, where if you log onto the dashboard, you can look at like the areas that they're focusing on, even down to departmental like specific progress and the goals. And so it's very comprehensive, and I found it really cool that they created this specifically to track their 1.9 billion. And then the other county is Orange County. They created, not using ARPA fund, but previous COVID fund, but they're still using this equity map, which is a like a public health map where they can see where disadvantaged populations live in their county and really target resources and efforts there. Some county, but like in terms of gaps and limitations, most counties fell short in really securing the capacity they talk about racial equity, but there's no department or personnel to really implement that or building in the evaluation mechanism. Some counties did not mention racial equity at all. And generally, we just noticed that counties really need the technical assistance. Next slide. Community engagement. So almost all of the counties announced the program, and half of them hosted some sort of educational workshops or surveys to really engage with their communities. Some of the efforts that we found that was really worth noting was, number one, what we heard from Ventura County is that they're really engaging the existing COVID work group in their ARPA decisions. And, you know, Orange County put a public comment portal on their ARPA website for people to, you know, submit comments. And LA, you know, being the front runner in this, all of the departments that are receiving ARPA money actually have to submit an equity and community engagement plan. So that is like sort of I think the best implementation that we've seen. Gaps and limitations. Sacramento hired Deloitte, the consulting company, using 1.16 million from their ARPA money to do a community survey, but they failed by not collecting demographic data. So there was no way for Sacramento to really use the results of the community survey to inform their ARPA uses. And it was frankly a waste of public dollars to do that. And then some other counties just barely did any community engagement. Next slide, please. Sorry, realizing I'm coming close to time, but really quickly, lastly, transparency, accountability, and accessibility. So all of the counties luckily posted their 2021 annual recovery plans. And so that's an annual document where they get to like spell out what their plan is with the money they got. And some of them also, most of them referenced the Treasury's guidance, especially the equity language in their reports or websites. Lots of the counties actually set up a separate public website that they host ARPA information on. And then also want to give Ventura County props for doing multilingual ARPA research, community-facing ARPA research. In terms of gaps, we found that not every county posted their January spending report, which is the instrumental report that gives you really like the overview of what counties spend in the calendar year 2021. And then, only half of the counties have a dedicated contact email or phone. And then finally, San Francisco did not provide any public accounting or breakdown of their spending information. They put their entire 620 million into their general fund, basically treated as if it's just general tax revenues, and did not tell us which department or projects received specific ARPA dollars. Next slide. So the next slide would really just show you some of the examples of the ARPA websites. Again, feel free to look into this. A lot of this is listed on our scorecards, but I'm gonna stop there. And in fact, toss it to the next speaker, Alexis, because I think it's really great to like have local organizers join this webinar and really share a real world example of how they've been working on their local campaign. So I'm going to toss it to you, Alexis.
Hi, everybody. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Alexis Castro, and I'm a community organizer with the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition. And first off, I just wanted to start off by thanking the folks at CPEHN for all these amazing resources. It makes me really jealous to see what a government that's really functioning looks like. Unfortunately, that's not what we get in our neck of the woods. And so all these amazing resources, are great for even just start, I'll share a little bit more about kind of what we want, but we're in the implementation phase of our campaign. We're also looking at the county. And so these are all amazing resources that we'll definitely be using, and I hope that you all will be using as well. Like I mentioned, my name is Alexis Castro, and I'm a community organizer with the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition. Some of my colleagues are here as well: Daniela Flores, Dylan, Angel, Monique, and Yamir might be here as well. There are our newest interns, the last three I mentioned, and so we're really excited that they were able to join us. And I'm here to talk about the American Rescue Plan Act. I'm happy if you want to go to the next slide. I wanted to start off by setting a little bit of the context about Imperial County. Some of you may not be familiar with Imperial County. We're located 2 hours southeast of San Diego, right along the border region. I'm actually from Calexico. I live 3 blocks from the border. So I literally can walk and, and all these things that, you hear about in the news or on the border, are happening, right down the street, in our community. And, Imperial County has long been underinvested, and there's been very long-standing inequities that really came together at the height of the pandemic and made Imperial County one of the worst hit counties in not just in California but in the nation. And as you can see here, there's the COVID-19 death rate. Imperial County is the black right here on the graph, and as you can see, our death rate was more than double the next highest California county. This graph is the percentage of residents who are people of color. It represents one of the axes, and then the COVID-19 deaths per 10,000 residents presents the other. And so as you can see, with the higher percentage of residents who are people of color, there's a higher correlation of COVID-19 related deaths. And it was a really stark reminder, I think, of why the work that we do is so important. Folks were being flown out, as far as Sacramento. And this is an ongoing story for Imperial County, right? Unfortunately, every time that we're in the news, it seems like, it's not for so great things. We're either the highest county, the county with the most unemployment in the nation, or the county with the most polluted bodies of water in the nation. And so as you can see, like, you know, when COVID-19 hit, all of these, you know, just worsened the impacts, right? And our community was really hard hit. Next slide. And so out of this urgent need that we saw, Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition was born. We did a lot of work during the COVID-19 pandemic, but one of the you know, most recent things that we did, you know, our coalition was able to successfully advocate for 7.2 million in equitable projects for Calexico residents and workers. You know, and this was really, you know, I think definitely a work of community. You know, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll show you a little bit of some of our coalition partners. You know, it wasn't just Imperial Valley Equity and Justice. You know, we talked to folks who had experience at the state level, like CPEHN and the Latino Community Foundation. We talked to folks who, you know, had local experience and had, you know, maybe more decades experience in terms of the nonprofit world in Imperial County, like Comité Cívico. We you know, we talked a lot to direct service organizations like the Brownback Coalition. And, you know, we worked really closely with Calexico Union Against Corruption and Calexico Needs Change to really put forth a plan, you know, that would allow us the opportunity to not just, as was earlier mentioned, right, that it was an opportunity not just for us to highlight what this money could do for folks, but how this was an opportunity for us to change the way that our local elected officials worked with our community, right? There was really no community engagement when, you know, I mean, even to this day, right, there's very limited community engagement. A lot of the things that you all mentioned, you know, just were not happening. I mean, you know, not posting any of the information. I mean, folks would, you know, there's just a lot of apathy in our community. You know, we've, whether it's NAFTA or the USMCA or agriculture or, you know, so many industries have come in, solar, for example, have come in and promised the roof and everything under the stars. And unfortunately, none of those benefits have realized. And so the community has been pretty tired. And so that was also one of the things that we were trying to address is like, how do we overcome this apathy? And next slide. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about how we made this happen. You know, I obviously wanna, you know, I know there'll be time for questions at the end, but wanted to provide a little bit of an overview of how we built our campaign, and kind of what the steps that we took in order to make this happen. Next slide. So to start off, we wanted to highlight what the approved expenses. You know, we like I mentioned, we had been engaging with our local elected officials for quite a while, but I think you know, we wanted to showcase the first two expenses that the county approved, so you could kind of see where their priorities were at. So as you can see, the first approval that they made was for $1.2 million, and that was to buy fire department and police department vehicles. So it was 2 fire rescue ambulances and 3 utility vehicles, as well as 6 patrol vehicles and 2 pickup trucks. And then the next action that the city council decided to take was to pay their employees, right? To pay up to $7,000 per full-time and part-time eligible employee, right? And this was one of the things that we highlighted a lot through our campaign, right? Was like, you know, this showcases where your priorities are at. And ultimately, you know, our government made a lot of comments, promises, commitments around essential workers and frontline workers. And, you know, they came out and they took the pictures and they took the videos and they said, we love you, you're great. But then they didn't put any action behind that, right? And so it was really just empty words. And that's really what we highlighted a lot through, you know, for our community. You know, my mom's a farm worker. She's been a farm worker for over 40 years. And farm workers are the lifeblood of our community, and yet they've never been a priority for the city. They've never been a priority for the county. And so that's part of the messaging that we use throughout our campaign, right? That it's like ARPA is an opportunity for us to bring these, you know, community members who have been long overlooked to bring them to the decision-making table, right? And center their needs and center, center their needs, right? In order for us to make budgetary budgetary decisions. Next slide. So, when they come up, they made their approved expenses, the first two expenses, what ended up happening is our coalition came together. We put a letter together and just talked about a whole host of different proposals that the city could look at, to fund the rest of the $7.2 million that the city had left over in terms of the ARPA balance. We said you could spend money on a bonus pay program for essential workers. You could create cooling centers. You could address like mental health. You could do some increase your outreach capacity. And so we sent that letter to the city council, I believe sometime in December. And as you can imagine, they acted like they never received it. And then they had a presentation. They did their one and only ARPA workshop in February. And, we went in there with thinking like it's going to be a conversation. But really what happened is they essentially said, we received this request. They said that they had received our request in January, which was inaccurate. They received it in December. And then they said, oh, and these are what we're proposing to expend the money on, right? And as you can see, a lot of it is like on public facilities and city broadband and indoor ventilation, nothing on people, right? There's no mention of people. There's no mention of community. There's no mention of like COVID, right? Like the impacts of COVID. And so, that city council meeting, that workshop, a lot of us turned down, and the community really showcased why this was inadequate, right? Like we just went through a pandemic that, like we mentioned to you all, like put us at, a really horrible position, right? In terms of what the impacts to our community, what they were having. The border was closed, and that had a huge impact on our businesses and and even just on our community, right? We're a binational community that goes back and forth, right? And that are very interdependent on Mexico, right? And on Mexicali. And so, it showcased that a lot of the crises that the community was facing weren't part of their priorities. Yeah, like Daniela mentioned, and the workshop only came after public outcry from the lack of engagement. 200 businesses closed, right? And this is how, like, and something that I'll mention, what we highlighted a lot of the times was just like the laziness of the city council, right? That they saw these 7.2 million, and the federal government, the state, is like making billions of dollars in infrastructure and broadband, like investments. They're having conversations, and instead of saying like, oh, let's try and do our bigger bang for our buck, let's try and draw down federal funds and then use these more flexible funds for community needs, they're just like, no, whatever, they're not even willing to look out there and do their work, right? And that's also part of the thing that we highlighted for them, right? That we came together, we created a list of over 40 different types of grants that they could apply at the state and federal level. And that was thanks to work that we, with our partners, that we were able to come up with that. And I would say that from this moment on is really where we try to put together kind of like a mini escalation plan, right? We didn't really have a lot of time to think things through, but we did things like we attended the public comments, we sent that letter in October, we created a petition through actionnetwork.org where folks could, it was essentially a copy of the letter that we sent in various different languages, in Spanish and in English, and in various different formats that folks could just click and they could send up a copy of the letter directly to their city council. We wrote op-eds. We did a teach-in. We worked with our city council and we came up with an alternative proposal, which I'll showcase in a little bit. And we also worked on a community survey, that I'll also showcase in a little bit, that really helped us build the argument around why the decisions that the city council was making were ineffective, right? Next slide. And so we came up with this alternate proposal around the things that we think should be funded, right? A big piece, that we highlighted was the need for a complete rehabilitation of downtown, right? That actually meets the needs of essential workers. A lot of our population in downtown, like I mentioned, I live in downtown. At 3 a.m. in the morning, you can look and it looks like the city is alive. And at 3 p.m. in the morning, at 3 p.m. during the afternoon, it's dead, right? And yet the city doesn't function for the people, the downtown doesn't function for the people that need it, right? There's no, it gets 115, 120, degrees in the summer on a regular day, right? And if we really want to think about economic development and community development, like it just doesn't make any sense for people not to have access to drinking waters, to cooling stations, to restrooms, right? Our downtown looks horrible because we don't have access to restrooms, which again, having just come from the pandemic, a public health emergency, you think that like it would be a priority, right? And it just was not. There's a lot of folks that are experiencing homelessness, both farm workers who have to stay for, that decide to stay and sleep in the park because it'll take them 5 hours to cross the border, and they won't get any sleep otherwise, right? Folks who are the blood of our community, right? And there's no resources for them. And so we asked that there was a $3 million investment to completely rehabilitate the downtown and for their needs. We asked for $1 million for essential worker relief program that was essentially direct payment to essential workers like grocery, pharmacy, farm workers, etc. We put together a plan for an outreach specialist for $180,000 that would help us apply to some of the programming for our businesses and nonprofits and community members. We included something around emergency response equipment, right? Fire and ambulance. We, for quite some time, we didn't have ambulances. And our nearest hospital is not in our city, it's 15 to 20 minutes away, right? And so there's a huge need for fire emergency services. We included some funding for public facilities and for IT and free Wi-Fi. And again, in a lot of these public facilities, like I mentioned, our library is the only accessible form that people have. When I was in high school, like I didn't have a computer, I didn't have I didn't have internet, we couldn't afford it. And the library, I would get out of school and the library was the place that I would go to. And that library is about a 10 to 15 minute walk from downtown. And again, I would have to walk in 115, 120 degree weather to get to the library to be able to use those resources. And people shouldn't have to jump through hoops to use the resources. And then emergency park infrastructure and broadband infrastructure, again, to address these needs. Next slide. And what we did is, one of the things that I would say that really worked for us is that we focused on two things: accessibility for our community. So, I know we talked a lot about ARPA funds, but we try to connect that. We know that ARPA is a word that people is so foreign to them, right? And so we try to tie that to like COVID relief funds, COVID recovery funds, right? So that they would see the two words together. And then when they would see ARPA, they would say, oh, we're talking about the COVID-19 relief funds, right? We did like, we through the survey, one of the things that we also used, and in our messaging, we focused a lot on community engagement and the needs, and not on specific projects. So you'll notice we put a proposal first in December, and then we had the proposed plan B. What was ultimately adopted was slightly different. The outreach specialist was moved towards the parks, and that was because a lot of the times what we were saying is like, it's not about us, it's about we, right? It's about what the community wants. And if the community says we need a park and that's a priority, then that's what the community is saying, right? We're not, a lot of times the city council would try to be like, well, what is it the projects that you want to fund, right? As a way to neutralize us. And we would just go back and say, no, it's not about us, it's about we, right? And that's why we decided to do this community survey, right? To showcase that what were the priorities that our community was able to do. The fact that Sacramento, I texted our group chat and I said, Sacramento spent $1.16 million to Deloitte and they couldn't use that data. We did it with like $100. We created a flyer in a bit.ly code, and we like went outside, it's like the Walmart and the Food for Less, because they wouldn't let us pick it outside, and we put the flyers in the cars because we figured if you're an essential worker, you have to drive, right? So we're gonna get you in some shape or form, and they won't let us. We'll get your input in some shape or form, right? And this is what people said, right? Bonus pay program was the #1, and and folks said that that's what they should be used for, these funds, right? I mean, 94% of respondents said that that this is what the funds should be used for, and so we use that to then go back to our elected officials and drive down this point, right? And hammer down this point. And ultimately, we did, for example, a teach-in right before one of the city council meetings, and more folks turned out. And we used a lot of this to educate the community and then use it as an opportunity to plug them in. And so then they would go and make a public comment, and they would say, I just learned that, you all are trying to use this ARPA funds in these shape or forms, but like I may not know a lot, but I'll be back and I'll make sure that, like this lady I remember mentioned, she's like, oh, I don't know about farm workers, but for me it's, about the parks. And obviously, my mom's a farm worker, but instead of saying like, again, for us, it was like, it's not about you and I, it's about us, right? And the city council is making us pick between the park and the farm workers, but we could have it all. If they did their jobs, right? We could have ARPA, and we could draw down money from the federal and state government to do it all, right? And they're just not doing their jobs, and what's happening is pitting us against each other. And that, I would say, like, really helped. And our final hearing, that that day that we worked, we didn't think that we were gonna win. To be quite frank, it was a pretty grim day up until the public comment. And I have to say, I even get emotional just talking about it. Just people turned out, and like the comments that people made, like, I don't know. To me, it was like, that's why I'm in this work. Like, to me, it was always about bridging the gap between community and the government that serves them. And people were just like demanding. And to me, like that, like they weren't asking, they were done asking. They were demanding not what they wanted, what they deserved. And people said, like, this is our money, this is our community. And like, to me, it just, I don't know, it gives us a lot of hope, because it just like, it was like tearing down this apathy, right? And that's why from this momentum, we decided to then go for the county, right? And they've already made their spending decisions, and we said, like, why not? Like, why? Again, like, that money is not spent until it's spent, until you sign that contract. And so now we're engaging in a campaign to start with the county. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'll show the next slide. I like the biggest takeaway, and things that we're trying to implement from our campaign is like to organize. I was very lucky that I think, like, in college, I was just given, I think a lot of times we think of organizing as this like really far off thing, but our communities, like, it's in our blood. Like, just like resiliency is in our blood, so is organizing, right? Like, we do this without even thinking about it. And I feel like I was given the privilege to think these things through. And like, that's one of the things that we're trying to do more so, like within our coalition, is like, how can we use the resources and the knowledge that we have, pass it along, and build that technical capacity, right? So that we can, like, not just organize on this issue, but organize on other ones, right? And so with all our campaigns, we're trying to create escalation plans. And so I created that little graph around like the effort and risk and the pressure, right? And so the least amount of effort and risk, you always want to try and win, obviously, with the least amount of effort and risk, but it's probably going to be a low pressure action, right? And as you move towards your campaign, you should try and increase the pressure, and it also increases your effort and risk, right? But every action builds, after each other. And we're really focusing on building our base. Like I mentioned, we had this conversation earlier when we were preparing. We all use the term at Ivy Equity community organizer. And partly is because we want to build a horizontal structure, but it's also because we want to constantly remind ourselves that when we advocate for community, it's like, who is the community that we're advocating for, and naming that, and making sure that just because, like just like Starbucks and McDonald's uses community, community organizers can use community, and it can just be this really vague thing that can oftentimes, maybe our ego can get in the way, or maybe our organizational priorities can get in the way, and we're using the word community when we mean that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's like that constant reminding of naming that, right? And I feel like building our base is something that we want to do, especially because our community is highly farmer, and so it's like, how do we then bring them into the decision-making table, right? Like, how do we then ensure that they're the ones that are leading our campaigns? And a lot of it is by sharing you passing on the knowledge and the tools that we've had the privilege to gain. And finally, I would say, like, to use all the tools at your disposal, news, media, research, policy advocacy, narrative and storytelling, strategy and tactics, power mapping, and you may not know what these things are, but just Google them. I reach out to us, reach out to your colleagues. A lot of that stuff, you already know how you're doing, you already do it. And these are just fancy terms for the things that you're already doing, right? And so it's like, to the extent that, us at IB Equity can help, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to be able to share the lessons that we've learned to all of you. Well, the last slide is just actions that you may consider, and then resources that you all may want to use. And this PowerPoint will be available through that bit.ly. That's a lot of the resources that we use for our campaign. So hopefully you can use them for yours.
Wow, thank you.
Sorry, I was so long-winded.
It was so good. Can we get a clap react? Can we get a celebration emoji? Amazing, incredible work, really holding it down. Building up hope through humanizing and healing budget advocacy. This is what we want to see. This is what we can do. There's so much opportunity here. Alexis, I hope you're seeing all the love in the chat. It's blowing up here. Can we hit the next couples? Thank you. So, you're probably hopefully folks are feeling inspired. Hopefully you've seen these county scorecards thinking, how can I get involved to advocate in the same way, to fight for what the people want in our ARPA process. So we're going to share some quick tools. And next slide, please. So ways to get involved. We want to make sure that you have all the tools that at your disposal. We're here, and so some 3 ways that you can get involved. Understand what your county or city is currently doing with their ARPA funds. Assess how your county is engaging in with communities in ARPA decisions and these funding decisions. And based off that, build a collective, build with others to create a list of demands that reflect your community needs and wants. And other people have been advocating for a people's spending plan. And so that's something that we can do together. And so we'll share a couple of resources. Next slide, please. So understanding what your county is currently doing, how much money is left, what programs or projects has my local government decided to spend money on. So the Treasury has all the spending information up to January 2022. It should be posted on the Treasury website, should be linked in the chat. And there should be an upcoming July 31st of this year annual recovery plan. So you'll be able to see some updates. And to be able to understand, when we were trying to develop these scorecards, when we're trying to understand what's going on, check out the city county if they have a website. Most of them do, not all of them. Review Board of Supervisors, City Council meeting minutes. And if you don't see anything there, just reach out directly. Wayu has been so good in just emailing so many different people. People have been responding back. You should be getting responses. And then overall, you can utilize our scorecard analysis as a jumping off point. Next slide. And then you're able to assess, how is your community engaging with your county engaging with community on these funds? Do they have a website? Have they made multilingual community surveys? Have they hosted these educational workshops? Do they have a public comment period? Sometimes they do, but sometimes it's only maybe a few days. And so that's not enough time for us to actively share what we want to see in a budget. Next slide. And again, I'm going quick, but all these slides will be linked in the future with some resources. And then finally, just advocate with people. You know, we're out here advocating for a people spending plan. Most of the local budgets, you can really build. Other folks have been doing this work. And we want you to, CPEHN is here to provide you with any technical support. You can see a letter that we sent with Calexico City Council, get in touch with Wei Yu. She's been super visionary, inspiring visionary here. Next slide. And then finally, we've compiled a list of topics. I think Monica has just been blowing up the chat with some of these copy and paste links. But there's ARPA collected resources. We have building a framework, defunding and divesting from policing and investing in community safety and resources. You know, 40 to 60% of most, you know, of our county city budgets go towards police. This should be going towards, you know, community investment, youth programming, healthcare, livable wages. And then also, you know, what are the toolkits? Who are the key players on how to create a budget in the first place? And then who are the people you can get connected with after? We have people budget coalitions across California. We have links here. I saw in the chat, some people are part of coalitions. Please drop your emails so we can share. And then next slide. I'll pass it back to Wei Yu. That was very short, but we'll have all these resources for you so that you can really build with others and build this budget that you wish to see.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you, Alexis. Just every time I hear about your story and the organizing and the, you know, really the dedication and then the passion really comes through in how you're telling the story. And I got emotional too, just hearing about the organizing piece. Yes, like organizing is in our blood, right? And these are public dollars that they, you know, are responding to a specific, you know, COVID inequity and are coming from taxpayer dollars. And so we have to hold them accountable, and we have every right to ask what our local governments are using these money for and to really steer the direction of their decisions, right? So yeah, no, so like so much gratitude for our speakers. I want to open up for questions. And I also want to say that we have a, you know, we have about perhaps 10 more minutes to do questions. But if you do have additional questions or comments or requests, either for CPEHN or for, you know, Alexis and his team, please fill out a survey. It's like a really short survey. And put in the chat so that there's additional opportunities to really interact with us. But for now, I'm going to open up, actually, let me check. So I think one of the earlier questions that we received was, so are counties that did not conduct community engagement in violation of the rules, the interim and the final rules? So the short answer is they're not. They're not in violation because you know, these rules are essentially guidance language. They are recommendations for counties. Like I said, the only illegal piece that counties can possibly do is to deposit money into pension accounts. But as far as whether or not they're focusing on racial equity and social equity, whether or not they're engaging their community constituents, that is not, if they're not doing that, that's not illegal. And so again, it really comes down to the point where we've been making during this webinar, that it is up to local organizers and you know, policy advocates like CPEHN, like it's up to us to hold local governments accountable. And you know, in CPEHN's work, at least we try to really have a communication channel with the federal government, with the US Treasury, hoping to really bring some of this on the ground information to them and see whether or not they can further issue guidance and technical assistance for their, you know, subordinates, right, who are getting money from them. But really, I think it has to, all parts have a role to play in this accountability piece. Unfortunately, they're not going to get fined for not doing community engagement. And I believe people can actually just hop on mic and unmute So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself.
Since no one's really asking anything, I was wondering if I could just share something. So hi everyone, my name is Daniela Flores, also from the Imperial Valley Equity and Justice Coalition. And I just wanted to add one part of the story that we didn't share, just because there's a lot to share, is that, in the last week, what Alexis presented happened in March 16th, and it's almost July, and the city of Calexico has stalled on the implementation, and partly there's a lot of bottlenecks right now. There's a lot of internal issues. We have an interim city manager, so we don't have a stable city manager. Like the city manager that we kind of negotiated this thing with, like, left to get a county CEO job. And so just to share that, like, now, even though like we secured the allocation, the implementation is like the thing we're working on now, and making sure that they actually implement the program. So the money's there. As they're making general funds and like just their budget hearings separate from ARPA, there was an indication that some department heads wanted to take some of the ARPA money to, like Alexis said, buy bullets and guns. That was one of the requests made at a budget hearing. So just want to share, like, we felt like the ARPA allocation for equitable uses was under threat in the last week. So we kind of responded and wrote an op-ed, and we lobbied the city council, and I think we've got it under control, where we've pointed to the problems that they haven't implemented, and that's where they should be focused in. And so just wanted to share, like, of course, the challenge continues in a place like this, but we'll keep folks posted on how the story evolves, even just at this point.
Thank you so much for adding that, Daniela. And I think that also speaks to, again, I want to say the accountability piece. Maybe the counties and cities will have like a great spending plan, but when it comes to the implementation phase, whether or not they're setting up programs and giving funding to the right, departments, the right community-based organizations, that is still up to us to really monitor and hold them accountable. And so, there's much work to be done in the next couple of years, really looking at how this funding is being, planned out. And I saw another question in the chat. So Teresa is asking, how much interaction have you had with mayors, and how much power do mayors have over, where the money is spent? And so, I think from CPEHN'S end, most of our analysis is on county level. And so it's a combination with the administrative branch and the board of supervisors, but obviously the supervisors have a lot of power. But I'm gonna actually invite Alexis and Daniela to share in your experience. How does the mayor play a role?
So in our city council, they like rotate the mayor. It's like a rotating mayor. I would say like our city council has like the power to set the agenda, etc. But I think for us, our focus was like getting that third vote, right? Because we knew that we had two council members that were supportive. And so part of the thing was like trying to figure out who's the third vote that we can get, right? And like, what are the pressure points that we can apply to make sure that they vote a certain way, right? And I think what's really helpful about this year is it's an election year. And so a lot of like, we think that's why also like our mayor, for example, was in support or continues to be like, I wouldn't say supportive, but I think he's like more scared of like undoing some of the priorities like this time around, right? When the conversation around bullets and guns. And so part of what we've been doing is, like Daniela mentioned, using the op-ed, turning out to public comment to make sure that they know that we're still watching. Because I think the big thing is like, you know, we had that ARPA conversation, and now they're trying to slip in a conversation at 2 p.m. that is no community member could make it to. It was literally between department heads and the city council, and they were just having a conversation, right? And that's what we highlighted this last city council, that it's like at that point, why even have a city council meeting, right? If you're just gonna be having a conversation with your staff and use that, like, and even just like the city council, we're dealing with a lot of like for example, our mayor, the last city council asked for a continuing resolution on our budget. And then this city council meeting, the city manager came out with the resolution to actually approve the budget. And then through the dais, they had to have a conversation around what a continuing resolution is and how you write a continuing resolution. So it's like, I feel like it's just even these things, right? That oftentimes it's just like, you know, plain ignorance, right? And so we've used that as a way to keep the pressure on the mayor. But I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add, Daniela.
You covered it. I see someone
Dan
with their hand raised.
Yeah. Hi, could I ask a question? This is Dan Geiger. I'm with the Budget Justice Coalition in Contra Costa County. And we did a campaign on ARPA funding, not nearly as successful as you all in Imperial Valley. I'm really impressed. Congratulations. One of the things that happened in Contra Costa County is that they devoted 100% of ARPA funds for both years to the Health Services Department for quote unquote COVID-related health expenses. I've not found, actually I found maybe one other county in the entire country that did that, which was Marin County. And I've hammered at them like several times. Why is it that you have to use 100%? Nobody else is doing this. Look at LA, look at all these others. And we just hit a stone wall and I can't get a good answer why that's happening. And I'm wondering if anybody has any, knowledge of any other county that is doing it in it that way, or what possible explanations for that could be.
I'll just say, I was just wondering if you've already submitted like a public records request with like what they have expended, or like, because I think they've also put us up into a black box with the county, but we're trying to do it that way, where we're asking like, okay, fine, what are you spending it in? But no, I'll let others chime in to see if that's happened in other cases.
Yeah, I mean, they did provide some reporting, but it was like personnel, 64 million, then a list
Very
of other
general.
things. And, it's like you can't really tell what they're spending it on.
I think a lot of, I think what really worked for us is the fact that we kept highlighting like how they were just essentially either being lazy or they were like not doing their jobs, right? And like using, so that our teachings, and we did a lot of stuff where we could grow our base and educate them around this. And I remember, when we did that list of like 40 grants and we made that comment in the public comment, we got like messages from community members just saying like, wow, I can't believe that the city council, right, would take the easy way out and not do their jobs, right? And I think like what I'm hearing from you, that's what it sounds like, that they're like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly,
well,
exactly.
We have COVID, well, let's just do it with public health and let's not actually do the work that's needed to make sure that it meets the needs. And so to the extent that maybe you could like highlight, and especially now if they're dragging their feet, right? I think one of the things that works is that like people know is that government tends to be inefficient. And so it's like, you can use that field to say like, look, these folks are dragging their feet, they're not spending their money and they should. And opening that door and saying like, there's actually these other things that there's a high need, right? I think a lot of the things that we're focusing a lot, or we're going to start pivoting on, is also the rising, like the inflation and the the fact that like things are getting more expensive and there's even more of a need, right? For people, like people are having a hard time paying their bills, etc. And one of the comments, for example, that our city manager made was like, well, we need to hire more staff because without the staff, we won't, it's almost like this argument of like, oh, in order for, we're going to remove services to create more bureaucracy so that we can provide more services. That's literally their argument, right? That they're saying we're going to hire 6 cops and we're going to hire a custodian and then all of a sudden you're all going to get services, right? As opposed to a $500 check, right? Like, I think oftentimes like highlighting that, like for folks, like I think using that like sense of like, again, that government, like that sense of accountability, right? That folks need to hold their government accountable, or there's this missed opportunity, might help you like open the door. Because I think right now what you need is like to create the political opportunity, right, for them to change. And I think the way you do that is by showing either how inefficient it is. That's what we're trying to do with the county, right? We're going to try and showcase a lot of like why it doesn't make sense, that because they've already allocated the funds, but they haven't expended. And so we're saying like, clearly you just took the easy route, you put these buckets and you didn't even do the due diligence, your responsibility as an elected official, which is like, come up with a solution in the plan. You're just passing it off to someone else, to decide to do whatever they want with all these millions of dollars. And I think like, that's what tended to work a lot. And I started to see that happen a lot. Like even we're dealing with another thing around lithium. And a lot of folks, that's what the comments that they make. They're like, oh, you have a fiduciary responsibility, or you have like this response, right? Which is something that I had never seen before. And so it's like, I started noticing at least how and this was one of our own city council supervisors who came to the IAD and said, oh, you all have this responsibility to know what you're voting on, and right? Which is literally what we had just told him, that he had a responsibility to know exactly what he was voting on. So,
Alexis?
Great,
Sounds
thanks.
like this conversation
Exactly.
went
Alexis, I'll
longer.
just say exactly. Yeah.
A separate space. So, but Dan, please get in touch. You have our contact. Let's talk more.
Yeah,
We
we'd
didn't
love
do
to do
analysis
that.
on
Thank you.
these two counties, but love to really look into this. But just in respect of everybody's time, really appreciate all of our speakers. Appreciate the questions that folks have been asking and engaging with us in the chat. There's appreciations that we're sending out to the community organizations that helped with this project. But really, just lots of gratitude, and reminder that please fill out the survey that we shared in the chat. We'll send out a follow-up email as well. If you do have additional, questions and you want to like set up a meeting with us, love to do this. And at the end of the day, we hope our project is, really supporting the advocacy you're doing to make a change on the ground. And so, yeah, get in touch. So with that being said, we're going to close the webinar. So yeah, I hope everybody have a good rest of your day and good rest of your week, and we'll connect offline. Thank you, everyone.